Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm looking forward to chatting with our next guest. Now, I say this probably 1,000 times a month probably. I knew nothing about the secret family courts. I certainly knew nothing about forced adoption. I knew nothing about an industry for the placement of children in foster care and into adoption in this country until about a year and a half ago, when Emma Ibbitson became the first of a number of women to come on this programme to tell us horrifying stories about how they lost their children. It's become certainly not a crusade for me or for this programme or for my producers, but it's become, I've become determined in the small way, in my small way, to let more and more people, or as many people as I can, know that this is a scandal and it's going on in this country. Last week, of course, or just the week before last, we had Ian Josephs on the programme speaking to us from France about this. Our next guest is a former Liberal Democrat MP, and he's been writing about it and speaking about it quite a lot over the last few years. He set up the website justiceforfamilies.org.uk, justice-for-families.org.uk. I'm going to tweet it out now. You need to get on there and see. There's a lot of facts on there as well. He wrote an incredible article, or he was the subject of an incredible article for The Independent back in January of 2014. The glaring headline in The Independent, Lib Dem MP John Hemming tells parents suspected of child abuse to flee Britain because they can't get a fair trial. It's a terrific, it's a pleasure for us to welcome to the programme John Hemming, who joins us now. And John, thanks for taking the time out to speak to us. How are you?
Sound check. So, can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear. You're coming through loud and clear. Just about. How are you?
I'm all right. All in all.
Well, thanks for doing it, John. And as I said in my pretty long-winded, unusual for me, my lengthy introduction there, I knew nothing about this until about a year ago. Yeah. Nothing about it. And then women started ringing this programme to say, can we come on? Because we can't get on to 5 Live. We can't get on to Channel 5 because we're barred. We're not allowed to speak. Now, we did the due diligence, John, and we checked out these women. We're not idiots here. We don't let people come on here and make claims against people they can't substantiate. And I found out that people were having their children taken. One woman, John, for doing something as simple as putting her child into a road safety film.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of things. I had one today where I met a lady who's had 3 children taken off her. And it's very weak reasoning. There's nothing that you would think is sensible. And it's gone on for some time. And at the end of the day, the reason it happens in part is it's secret, because there'd be such an outcry if it wasn't. And the difficulty you have is you have some really serious miscarriages of justice going on, but they're injuncted. And so you're prevented from, people are prevented from finding out about what's going on.
You're an experienced man. You've been an MP. You've been involved in public life for a long time.
Yeah.
When did you first become aware of this, John? Was it
2006, 7, 8? It was
a constituent. Was it?
I became aware of the adoption targets and the fact that the councils were being given millions of pounds to take children from one family and put them with another. And I've got all the stats. It's called public service agreements, and basically they measured the number of children that were adopted, and the more, if they hit a particular target, like Essex got a few £1 million. I've got all the stats on it. I can look them up if you want. You then look at the whole process, and it's important to understand how it actually works. And how it actually works is this: they go to court as to what's going to happen to somebody's children. And a judge says to the social workers, what do you think should happen? And the social workers say the child should be adopted. And then that's it, because the parents don't have an independent expert on their side. So basically the judge relies upon the opinion of the social workers. There's a well-known Latvian case. Obviously, we need to stay within the law. but that's on my blog, and it's the Latvian case. It's a Home Alone case where she's a journalist, in fact, and she this is in London, in the London borough of Merton, by the way. So when I say it's Latvian, that's because she's a Latvian citizen. You can find the judgments all over the place, and if you look at my blog, which is johnhemming.blogspot.com, you'll find last year I put up the police report about the incident that resulted in her daughter being adopted. And basically, she'd arranged for a babysitter to look after her, I think, about 2-year-old daughter, 18 months. She went out before the babysitter arrived, and it ended up the police were called by the landlord with whom she was having a row, and the police took the baby away. But whilst the police were there, the babysitter turned up. So it's quite clear, and obviously she didn't know at that stage the police were there, so it's quite clear she had arranged for a babysitter, and the police records confirm that. Now, she shouldn't have gone out and left baby alone whilst waiting for the babysitter. She should have stayed till the babysitter turned up. But that's not in itself sufficient cause to have her child adopted, particularly as she had a sort of 16-year-old daughter with her as well.
Did the child go into permanent adoption, John?
Yes, and it's caused a big row. There's been a lot of stress in the Latvian Parliament about the issue because we did an application to various courts. It's gone off to the European Court of Human Rights, drafted by a Latvian lawyer with my assistance. And it's a good case because a lot of it's actually in the public domain, apart from the lady's name. And basically, as I said, I've got on my blog, I redacted the police report to take the names of everybody off it, including those of the police officers. And the police report confirms that she'd arranged for a babysitter. Because obviously there's a difference between going out and abandoning your child and going out and before the babysitter turns up and the babysitter gets stuck in traffic, which a mistake, but it's not something you should say somebody's child should be adopted. But the point about it is that the social workers are managed by the local authority. And central government, for laudable reasons, the central government theory is these children would otherwise be in care. And we need to get them adopted because care is dreadful. And I think people would accept the care system is not very good. And so what they do is that they tell the ministers and Ofsted say to the leaders of the councils and the cabinet members for children's services, get more children adopted. And they tell the Director of Children's Services, get more children adopted. And the Director of Children's Services tells the area team leaders, get more children adopted. And the area team leaders tell the sort of lower team leaders, get more children adopted. And they tell the social workers, get more children adopted. And if I had a case of a social worker in Leicester in 2012, and she thought that a baby would be best returned to its parents, and she therefore didn't want to say to the court this baby should be adopted, so they fired her. We are understandably getting tweeted unmercifully here. I expected this, and we're getting emailed from people. A lot of them are saying they're glad that somebody like you is raising awareness of this as best as you possibly can. There's too many of those to go into. Number of people are saying, I've had an email here from John who says this, it's as simple as this. He says, please put to John Hemming that I believe as a father of a child, it hasn't happened to him, by the way, he said this hasn't happened to him, but as a father of a young boy, are we not a failed state if parents are having to run out of this country every year, year on year, to avoid having their children taken from them? Failed state, John. Is this a failed state we're living in? Well, it's a failure of the judicial system. One of the reasons it's got so bad is that our constitution operates with the three estates of the constitution: the legislature, the government, and the judiciary. And the judiciary is supposed to be independent, rightly so. You don't want, who you elect to decide who's guilty and who's innocent. But the difficulty is there's a weak legislature, and the legislature hasn't properly looked at what's going on. The government makes the civil servants believe an assessment is an assessment. It's a matter of fact. and if a local government social worker does an assessment and they're told by the manager to fail somebody because the manager wants them to be failed so that they can get the child adopted, they are in a difficult. As I said, this is the case I cite from Leicester, is where somebody was fired for wanting to reunite a family. And essentially, it comes down to these questions of how the courts make the decision, and the courts make the decision on the basis of the opinion of various people. And they do get jointly appointed experts, but that doesn't help, because if I tell you this, we had a case where we found the jointly appointed expert was on a retainer to the local authority. So the expert made £80,000 or so a year from Hertfordshire County Council. Now, would you say to me that that person is independent? Or would you say, in fact, they are financially controlled by the local authority? I would think you'd probably agree with me that they're financially controlled by the local authority. But from the court's point of view, they said, oh, that's okay, we don't care about that. Now, I don't think most people would say that's reasonable. And this is why you don't get a fair trial, because basically the evidence is all biased, or not all of it's biased, but the substantial majority of it is biased against the parents.
Tell me about the financial circumstances of those who are targeted. I got into some of this with Ian Josephs, and obviously I've been reading you and I've been reading Christopher Booker. I was aware of the Latvian case. I didn't realise, though, that the child was put into permanent adoption. I'm shocked at that.
No, it's
I must
on
have
my
overlooked.
blog.
Oh no, I don't doubt you. Yeah. I just didn't notice that. I thought I'm horrified by that. Catherine tweets this: they didn't take the McCann's children away for leaving them on their own. I thought somebody might tweet that.
Portugal, didn't they?
They stayed in Portugal. Yeah.
If they'd come back to England, if that had happened in Butlins, their kids are being put up for adoption.
Despite the connections of the McCanns, do you really believe that?
Well, if it had happened in Butlins, yes. Well, it would have been, it would have been very difficult for them to argue not to do that.
Because that was my question, wasn't it? Really, I'm wondering about the sorts of people. I mean, it's 20,000 a year. We know. Are these people in the lower socioeconomic bracket?
20,000 what though?
It's 20,000 children put into foster care or adopted every year, isn't it?
Well, you see, it's complicated because you get Section 20, which is voluntary care.
Yeah.
And you get compulsory care, which is, you can get various things. The police, people talk about a police protection order. There isn't actually a police protection order. It's where the police, under the Children's Act, see a child at risk, which could be just a child, toddler wandering around the streets, and they take the child into their care. You've got to have a system like that. Then you have emergency protection orders, and you have interim care orders, and you have care orders, and you also have, they count children who are imprisoned for committing offences, so they're sentenced to periods in young offenders institutes. Under 16, they get counted as compulsory in care as well. And there's about, in England, every year, starting on the 1st of April to the 31st of March, there's about 12,000 children compulsorily taken into care, of which those that leave, there's about 4,000 or 5,000 that are adopted.
Jesus, John.
In England.
Oh, yeah.
I focus on the stats for England rather than the statistics. Obviously the Scotland's not as bad as England. Wales is much the same. And Northern Ireland's not that bad either, comparatively.
So many tweets. Let me read a few tweets. If you're just joining the programme, the politician John Hemming is on the line to us. John's a former Lib Dem MP. I'm just going to give you John's blog again. It's an easy one to remember. It's johnhemming.blogspot.co.uk.
No, yeah, that'll work. I think it's normally .com, but both will work.
Yeah, both will work, John. Generally, both work. Yeah, thanks for that. A lot of people interested in this. Karen says, if you have money to get out of the country, you're okay. If you don't, then you're stuffed, she says. We'll come back to that in a minute.
That's essentially right. It is. There is some support outside the country, but it's not as it used to be.
Ronan, you see, it's hard for me to get my head around, John. It still is, despite the fact I began talking about this on this programme in January of 2015. I still can't believe we're living in supposedly a first world country, supposedly a democratic country, where women might be thinking about getting the hell out of Dodge to stop a tyrannical state saying to them, because you suffered from mental health problems in the past, because you've got a few issues, you know, at the moment with your health, we're going to have your child. So women are thinking about getting to Ireland or getting to France. I know it's happening, John.
Oh, I know it's happening.
And I'm scratching my head going,
another one
how?
you should interview is Brian Rothery, because he supports a lot of the people who go to Ireland.
To Ireland, yeah. I've heard about Brian, yeah.
And basically, there's a support network floating around, but again, a lot of it is if you're going to go to France or Spain. There's a big English community, and there's quite a few English people.
Yeah.
In France as well, but if you go to France, you've really got to be unless you've got large amounts of money, you've got to expect to learn French and get a job, and that's not that easy for people in a foreign country. And so, there are people who really it's a bit of a challenge for them to do that. And although there's a sort of like refugee centre in northern France. There's no money for it, so the people have to find some money somehow or other.
John, a disproportionate amount of women who suspect their partner or their husband has committed a sexual offence against their child are being disbelieved and are ending up being estranged from their children. Now, I've looked into this, and I know that we're all capable of bitterness and hostility when a relationship ends, and it's not beyond the possibility that people can stoop so low as to make unfounded allegations about their ex-partners. But when I started to look into how often when a woman suspects that her child is being sexually abused by her partner, that woman then ends up being basically, accused of a crime. I couldn't believe that. Tell me about your own experiences of that particular situation.
Well, I'm aware of. I've followed cases from the start where that appears to be happening. There's one particular case in Birmingham where the police were clearly of the view that a crime had been committed, but obviously, and rightly so, the standard of proof for criminal prosecutions is quite high, and it should be quite high, because we shouldn't be going around trying to lock up innocent people. The difficulty then arises that you sort of reverse the burden of proof in the family court. So you have this situation where there isn't the standard of proof to get a conviction, and therefore the allegations are considered by the courts to be false, and that's considered to be emotional abuse. And they'll often at times reverse the residency of the child, and that has a lot of dangers as a process, and it's clearly going on. But it is a much, much harder thing to look at. It is, I think, in part the interplay between the beyond reasonable doubt standard of proof in criminal proceedings and the on balance of probabilities standard of proof in the family courts. Tell
me this, John, because I want to talk a little bit more about this, and then I want to ask you about the historic child sex abuse inquiry.
Yeah.
Tell me, what can people do about this? This program goes out several different platforms. A lot of people listen to it, and we get inundated by correspondence from people. I should plug at this stage, by the way, next Wednesday we're doing something extraordinary. We're opening the program to women and men whom this has happened to.
Yeah.
And
the thing is, if they talk anonymously and you don't name them, you're reasonably okay, as long as nobody's named. It's a complicated argument. The thing is that the local authorities are quite vicious in the way they go around trying to lock people up. Have you ever looked at the case of Kathy Danby?
No.
Now, her case, she's actually in her 70s and lives in Orkney. And back in 2014, under pressure from a local authority, the local authority being Derbyshire, she went to Liverpool to a Ken Dodd concert, was arrested and put in jail. And you'll find the story. It was in the Daily Mail and all the national newspapers. So you can find the story. But you have these situations. One of my battles has been to stop local authorities locking people up in secret. And they have in the past locked up grandmothers for complaining on Facebook about the adoption of their grandchildren.
Yeah,
but as long as people, to some extent, they can be quite vicious.
That's beyond vicious, John. What you're describing there is Third Reich type stuff.
Well, it was the Kathy Danby one. If you Kathy Danby, if you look it on Google, you'll find the story in the Daily Mail. They dumped her in Birmingham, which was useful for me because I was in Birmingham. But they're basically having arrested her in Liverpool and left her goods and bags somewhere up in I don't know where it was, somewhere in Staffordshire. She ended up in Birmingham without anything. Luckily, the Daily Mail got her back to Orkney and got her sufficiently stuffed together, which was good of them. But there are some really nasty things that are done to people. There was a case of a lady who was imprisoned over the weekend just because somebody stayed with her overnight. And that was a problem with the tipstaff, because the tipstaff had been given authority to arrest her, but there wasn't actually any evidence on which to arrest her. But she was still arrested. If it had been a criminal offence and nothing to do with the family courts, she wouldn't have been locked up for the weekend. This was, I think it was about February this year, something like that. That one is more public. I think the names are available. But basically, it's a good idea if you do things anonymously and people explain anonymously what's gone on with them. We advise.
You're absolutely right to make that point. We advise anybody coming on to be very careful about it
anonymously, because basically you get a feeling for what's going on without actually breaking the law about identification.
We had a couple on a few weeks ago. We've had them on twice. They're in Portugal now at the moment. She's Portuguese. Her name is Yolanda Souza. His name is Leonardo Edwards. He was involved in alternative medicine promotion. Something called Miracle Mineral Supplement, which some people believe is bleach. Other people say it isn't. It isn't banned or anything. I don't know anything about it. I certainly wouldn't endorse it. But she's a cardiophysiologist. She's got a good career. And their child was taken. And
I can't comment.
No, I wouldn't expect you, John. No, absolutely would not. I would never do that. No, it's a professional program. I would not ask you to comment on something you don't know anything about. They were absolutely adamant. They wanted to name themselves. They were daring the family court judge to basically lock them up for contempt. They are so aggressive in their pursuit of justice. They're in Portugal at the moment doing television interviews in Portugal, trying to get the Portuguese authorities, because she's Portuguese, to take an interest in it. It's absolutely tragic.
Foreign governments have complained. You need to contact the central. If you're a foreign citizen, you need to contact the Hague Convention Central Authority in your country, and you can find the details of that from the Hague Convention website. But each country has what's called a central authority. Ours happens to be the Office of the Official Solicitor, that deals with issues of international child issues to do with the Hague Convention and other various conventions and like. And it's worth, I've done quite a bit of work with the Slovak Republic. I had a case in 2012 where I got a couple of children back with their granny in the Slovak Republic. And also with the Latvians more recently. But the courts were, basically local authorities in the courts were dreadful on following the Vienna Convention, but that has now improved. It's not perfect, but it's got better.
But it's gotten better. Before we talk briefly about the Historic Child Sex Abuse Inquiry and your faith in that, or lack of, I don't know, I'm going to ask you. Before we get to that, what can people do, John? Our listeners are no different to anybody else. They are listening to this and they're horrified. They hear it regularly on this program.
They know about it. People do know about it. It affects a lot of people.
How do we beat it, John? What do we do to tear this down? How do we stop this?
Well, you actually do need to get Parliament has the power to deal with it, and in the end of the day, Parliament should implement laws that say courts should have independent evidence. It's not really. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
You would have thought so, John.
Yeah, because it is. Okay, the secrecy has allowed it to get as bad as it is, but it could be secret and actually not biased. That would be a step in the right direction. You see, one of the other problems you've got to watch is that you get the parents get caught out by the system and they say, oh, here's a lawyer for you. What they don't know at times is some of those lawyers are also paid by the local authority. And you can find that out. Each local authority has a list of payments over £500, and you can often see that the local authority is paying the solicitors on different cases. But obviously it creates a conflict of interest.
Jesus, John. Listen, We're coming up for 26 minutes to the top of the hour. John Hemming is on the line. Glad to have him on. He's been asking questions about this, along with some of our previous guests, Ian Josephs, Christopher Booker, who was on with us over a year ago, and others. This is serious stuff. I'll only disagree with you on one thing and one thing only, and that is that it could be secret and unbiased. I don't believe it should ever be secret. It's that serious.
No,
but I know where you're coming
secrecy.
from.
I'm just saying.
No, I know you're not promoting secrecy.
I'm not. What it is, I thought I was reasonably well known as somebody who campaigns more generally against injunctions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the point I make is that it's not that the secrecy is the only problem. The secrecy conceals the bias.
And of course, regardless of how many children are wrongfully taken from their homes, there are children whom are living in desperate situations.
There are people who you wouldn't want to...
No, I agree with that.
Or even on a temporary basis, people sometimes can't cope. But just because on a temporary basis somebody couldn't cope, you can actually see in the stats there is a very, very small number of children every year that are adopted who are originally taken into care because their parents didn't have enough money. And when I say very small, it's like 2 or 3 a year. But it's not really justifiable.
I want to move on to something else while I have you on. I've spoken at length to victims of child abuse and men and women who've made claims against the state. They haven't made claims against individual men and women. They've not been allowed to do that on this programme. Again, we're responsible. But I've spoken with men and women who have made complaints to the police about political figures or about, people who have been well known in business and stuff like that. Lowell Goddard, of course, has been brought in from New Zealand. That isn't news, but she's heading up the inquiry into the allegations about sex abuse at the highest levels of government and what have you. A couple of things I wanted to ask you about that. Victims I speak to have no confidence in the inquiry. And
well, they vary, to be honest. It depends.
No, I imagine they do. I'm just saying the ones I've spoken to say they have no confidence, and they say for two reasons. They believe that national and commercial media isn't directly involved in any cover-up, but is doing its best to portray the whole thing as a witch hunt. And they've used Harvey, I can never remember his surname.
Proctor.
Well done, Harvey Proctor. They've used that as an example.
Yeah.
I've had a running battle with Ian Dale from LBC, who worked around the Conservative Party in the late 70s and early 80s, and I've challenged Dale about Tim Fortescue. Dale has gone on LBC regularly to say it's all a witch hunt. I said to Dale, publicly, I've said, you're a liar. You know it isn't, because you know that Tim Fortescue said that when he was the whip, MPs were coming out of the woodwork to say, help me out, Tim, because the police are investigating me for buggering boys. John, in your own opinion, on what you've seen, how serious is this? How big? What is the scale, do you think, of the historic sex abuse?
The issue in Parliament of abuse of children in care, and there was research done by various people. I've quoted from it in my speeches. If you look at my speeches, which identified something like about 1 in 8 children in care were abused, and that was like in the 80s. Now, at the end of the day, if you're a child being abused by someone, it doesn't matter whether they're an MP or not. And it's I worry a little bit about the focus on high-profile cases where actually you need to be concentrating on the impact on the survivors of this rather than actually concentrating on the perpetrators, if you see what I mean. I've spent a lot of time dealing with people in Jersey, and as you may or may not know, but there were children where Liz Davis blew about children being sent from Islington to Jersey, and all the Hodler-Garen stuff. You remember about Jersey that the chief of police there, Graham Power, was actually suspended, and there was a super injunction used to stop allegations about criminal behaviour being made. So there's a lot of serious issues there. On the other hand, we have had some people who have been attention-seeking and have basically made up allegations on the back of attention-seeking. So your difficulty with this, as is the difficulty in many circumstances, is working out what the truth actually is. And I speak to survivor groups who are worried that people are being put off from talking to the police because of a lot of the fuss that's going on. And it's not necessarily, for instance, I'm not a fan at all of Exaro, who have basically been promoting fantasies. And it's just not clever when there's some real issues there behind it all.
John, how do we know? Now, I have no truck at all with Exaro either, funnily enough. Yeah. But how do we know these things are fantasies? Two things seem to be ignored, I'm not suggesting by you now, but by the media. Two things. There appears to be, through statements made by former CID personnel who say that as they were investigating this over the years,
it was shut down, yeah.
And it was getting very high. There's an enormous amount of evidence to suggest that Sir Edward Heath, if he was still alive, would have a lot to answer for. He would have a lot of questions to answer anyway, the former Prime Minister. And
again, I can't comment.
No, I wouldn't expect you to. No, God, no, and I'm not trying to Shanghai you at all. I'm just saying, as a private citizen, and I'm a real journalist, but I'm not an idiot, and I'm a responsible journalist. As a private citizen, I believe that he has a lot to answer. That's number one. He of course would have to be treated the same as anybody else. He would be innocent until proven guilty, but he would have questions to answer. But Tim Fortescue spoke to the BBC in 1997, and he suggested, John, and I'm not, making this up. I could dig the clip out very quickly and play it.
I think I know the clip you're referring to.
He said it was an epidemic.
Somebody who was a police officer in the Met Police in the 80s, who was aware that things that were happening that shouldn't happen. The difficulty with it, of course, is how you address a situation where some allegations are being made which are clearly fantasies, and other allegations are being made that are not. And I know it's upsetting a number of the survivors. The fact that it undermines their credibility when fantasies get massive publicity.
Can I ask you a quick question on that? Yeah. Is it possible that, and this might sound very conspiratorial in nature, but it's feasible, John. Is it possible that some of the more ridiculous allegations that have been made, and I'm, of course, like you, I'm well aware that there have been some fantasies. Could that not be malevolence, malfeasance on the part of a corrupt state that doesn't want the public to ever find out the
obviously the word
the
could
nature
is one thing. Is it likely? No. Let's deal with one of the things I dealt with in practice.
Yeah.
Was did you know there was a journalist banned from the UK to stop her investigation?
Yeah, she's been on this programme, John.
Oh, Leah McGrath Goodman.
Yeah, Leah's been on the programme.
So you know about Leah. You know that basically I got her a visa so she could come back.
That's right, yeah.
Now, that sort of activity, that is one where we have all the records to find out why she was banned, who was involved in it, what strings were pulled, etc., etc. And actually, what you have there is clearly some strange behaviour by the state. And you've got to remember that the time she was banned was before Jimmy Savile died. So she would have had the opportunity to chase up the issue of that and his attendance at Hotel Garen before he died, not after he died. And so this is the real difficulty. There are some real issues that need to be looked at, at the end of the day, when you go back and you say, okay, well, there are issues about the maltreatment of children in care. There's a story in the Sunday Post more recently in respect of children in care placed with a family in Crete who were abused there. And there's all sorts of issues about the accountability of the system that need to be addressed, not for what's happened in the past only, but also for what's potentially going to happen in the future, because we do need to try to improve things so that things don't continually go wrong. I've always said that about the UK, that very often government and public debate in the UK is about steering the ship of state, looking in the rearview mirror at the crash that happened a few years ago. You take Hillsborough, for instance. Hillsborough's cover-up took a number of years to be revealed.
Yeah.
But we still are in a situation where things are being covered up today, and the use of injunctions is used to cover up malpractice by the system. There's a case of somebody who did a runner from the Royal Courts of Justice to the Zimbabwean embassy emulating Julian Assange, but then managed to escape the country, unlike Julian Assange. And that's injuncted as well. Even though the person concerned doesn't want it to be injuncted, it is injuncted. And hence I can't go into the details of it. So, you're in a situation where we need to learn from the mistakes of the past and make sure we make things better for the future.
No, I agree with that. I'm very interested in the past, John. Obviously, as an Irishman. And a number of...
Everybody should be interested in the past.
Of course, but the levels to which the cover-up went in Ireland to protect the state as much as the Catholic Church from what happened in Ireland.
Well, yes, you see, what in the Irish situation is how many children died. That's
that's another thing. But
you have that, actually, you have those allegations being made. I won't identify in any situation here, but relating to the 1960s in the UK. And, where is the accountability for the care system? Where does that actual accountability rest? Be it in Ireland, be it in England or whatever. So it's a really big issue. And what Ivor Frank talks about, the remedy for the child. Ivor Frank is a barrister who I've worked with over the years on issues to do with care issues. He happens to be unique as a barrister, as far as I can tell, because he himself was in care at one stage. And so he understands the life of being in that powerless situation where you're in the control of the state and the state is responsible for monitoring your care. So, they have, in theory, an independent reviewing officer to look at the case of children in care, but the independent reviewing officer is another employee of the local authority. So they're not actually, again, independent. It's the usual abuse of the word independent. There
are two things I want to mention briefly, and we're going to wrap it up in about 2 minutes anyway. I want to thank you for your time, by the way.
All right,
two things I have to mention. I'm duty bound to do it because it's only fair. A couple of people in this country whom are considered to be conspiracy theorists, writers, people like David Icke and others, were writing about this back in the 1990s, and they were naming names. They were naming people who were alive. They were talking about Haute de la Garenne. They were talking about other places as well.
Yeah.
And much of what they were writing has been borne out in news reports over the last 18 months. And it's fair, it must be said that people who were ridiculed for being crazy conspiracy theorists, that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Secondly, I want to ask you this. Now, this might sound unfair, and you certainly don't have to answer, and you might not talk to me again. John, look, I'm an Irish guy. When I said I'm a real journalist, I mean it. I'm an educated guy. We do responsible journalism here. I don't comment on Cliff Richard or anybody else or anything like that. Everybody is entitled to a fair trial, and they're entitled to be presumed innocent before that trial. Everybody, no matter who they are, how much money you have, where you come from. I believe that, and I would never speak about that sort of stuff. I do want to ask you this, though. Shouldn't the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, whom is suspected of nothing, and nor should he be, but shouldn't he be interviewed by CID or by Scotland Yard about his friendship with Jimmy Savile, only to learn from him things that he may have heard or suspicions he may have had? This is a guy who was the best friend of a record-breaking paedophile. Why should he be exempt from? Because, John, if it was me and you, if you and I were best friends, why should he be exempt?
To be fair, this is an issue for the Goddard inquiry.
Yeah. But he's not going to be questioned by anybody, is he? It's unlikely, I would suggest.
The Goddard inquiry could find that there's reasonable cause to say that he should be interviewed. If the judge and the inquiry panel say he should answer questions, then fair enough, he should answer questions. But to be fair to him, he didn't put Jimmy Savile in charge of a hospital.
Edwina Curry did, and I've asked Edwina Curry on programmes before, why did she do that? Edwina Curry is a regular guest on my programme.
She should be asked questions.
And I've asked her why she did it, and Edwina maintains that she'd never heard any rumours about Savile. At that point.
This is where one of my fears about the Savile inquiry is that they had a group of people whose job was it to sort of fillet the reports from the individual institutions, the individual hospitals. And it always worries me about that, which is that in the report, they only really reveal the things that people already know. And, I worry about terms of reference which control the access to information. So there could be things. You have to ask yourself a question in respect of Jimmy Savile: is how did he manage to get away with it for such a long period of time, and who was protecting him? Because you can't just go ahead and do all of that. There has to be.
And how could he be in such close proximity to the royal family?
Well, I'm not.
You have to ask that. I have to ask you. You don't have to, but I'm asking it as a journalist. Well, the BBC should be asking it.
Inquiry.
Yeah, ITV, Channel 4 should be asking it, but they won't ask it. Well, it's a disgrace, really.
It depends. You've got to find a little bit more.
Yeah.
See, obviously, I have been sort of involved in seeing how public bodies operate by being not just an MP, but also deputy leader of the city council and part of the management team for some time. It's how things work and who does favours for whom, which is the big question. Because you look, all the election fraud that was going on, because obviously I spent some time highlighting that, and all the different things that happen. It's not necessarily the case that the figurehead actually knows what's going on.
John, it was a real pleasure to have you on the programme. Thanks for doing the work you do about the secret courts and the family courts. Yeah. It's terrific. We're going to keep following it up. I will send you a copy next week of the special programme we're doing, which has gotten a lot of interest already.
Good. Well, I'm quite happy to. I don't mind doing questions from people at some stage in the future as well.
Well, I'd be delighted if you did that, yeah.
But I'm very happy. Basically, we need to highlight what's going on and what's wrong with the system, because that's the only way you get it fixed.
Good to chat with you, John. I'll tweet out your blog again. It's John Hemming. It's johnhemming.blogspot.com or .co.uk.
.co.uk as well. So I don't know. It probably works on both.
Both of them. I've just checked. Both of them works or work even. John, thanks for doing it. Really appreciate it. It's important stuff. And bye for now. John Hemming on the line to us there from his home.